All right, let's hope this works. I'm starting a bit of a YouTube series where I'm going to be sharing my experience having a hysterectomy. I had a partial hysterectomy rather than a full hysterectomy for personal reasons that I'll get into a little bit later. But I found that when I was preparing for my operation, I tried to research as much as I could about people's experiences, what they expected, what they didn't expect, how recovery went, all that kind of stuff. So I have been sharing my journey for the last couple of weeks, probably last month actually, online, and I've had quite a few questions, not like heaps, like I have 100 followers on TikTok, like calm down. But I have had probably about 20 to 30 people message me asking about certain things or relating to their experience as well. So to me, that's a lot. And I just thought I would share my experience with you. I will probably have to do this in like a 2 or 3 part series because I feel like I have quite a number of questions to get through and I don't just want to skim over too much, but I also don't want it to go forever. So, yeah, buckle in. Okay, so obviously the main question that gets asked is what did you have and why? So I had a hysterectomy done, partial hysterectomy, where I kept my ovaries. I removed my fallopian tubes, my uterus, and my cervix because of complications with my birth with Isabel. So unfortunately, just before Isabel was born, I was having a few pains and things. Turns out that my uterus had actually ruptured in that time, and we were very, very lucky. Nothing bad happened because that's a whole experience in itself. The obstetrician that I had at the time did indicate that you can have more children. However, it would be incredibly dangerous. There's a lot of things that would need to be in place. It'd be a high risk pregnancy, just a lot of things that didn't feel good to me. It felt really uneasy and I didn't like it. We didn't make any decisions straight away. We just kind of processed all of that. We're very grateful that nothing severe happened to Isabel and myself, because if you look into a uterus rupture, it can be fatal for both of us. It could be, yeah, a lot of things can go wrong with that. So we're very, very lucky. For us, then we knew we either wanted 2 or 3 children. I think too, I'm very fortunate that I had 2 beautiful, healthy children. I wouldn't want to risk anything or put myself or my child at risk. I don't think that would be fair. I think it was probably about 4 or 5 months postpartum when we started having this discussion of was I going to go through, or was I going to go down this road. Initially, my husband was going to get a vasectomy done. It hadn't really even crossed my mind to have a hysterectomy, but a few sort of life choices, the fact that I'd have a lot of period pain. A couple of years ago, I had a bit of a health scare with not cervical cancer itself, but I had cells that contained cervical cancer, if that makes sense. It's a bit tricky to explain that one. But so a few years ago in 2022, I had a biopsy done and I had high grade cervical cancer cells. Wasn't cancer yet, but it was high grade cervical cancer cells. Like I'd had a pap smear and that kind of thing, and it just wasn't good. So I'd had an appointment on a Wednesday morning, and then I got a phone call that night saying you're booked in for surgery Monday. Hopefully you're free. That's what we're doing. So it was that reason as well. I obviously didn't want to fall pregnant again and risk something happening. Yeah, there were quite a few personal reasons that I also won't dive into, but that's things that people already know. So, did you get a second opinion? Not necessarily. Kind of? No. Yes. Maybe. Kind of. I did speak to a couple of health professionals. I spoke to my GP, my gynecologist. Who else did I speak to? There was a few. There's about 3 or 4. My gynecologist was a little bit hesitant, mainly because of my age. I'm only 31. And they're like, oh, what if you want more kids down the future and we'll just take the risks as they come? And I was like, no, thank you. So I didn't necessarily get a second opinion in terms of going to another gynecologist or anything like that. But I had been working with mainly three health professionals that I've seen for years and years. So I trust them, they know me, they know different things. So I didn't feel the need to. What were you most nervous for beforehand? To be honest, it's going to sound a little bit stupid, but the thing that I was most concerned about was Isabel and whether she would take a bottle or not. She is still exclusively breastfed and will not take a bottle, so I was very concerned about how she would go, particularly during the night, and how Elliot would be able to try and settle her and feed her and all that kind of thing. But it actually turned out really easy. So she was really good. She also was a shocking sleeper before I went in for surgery, so that concerned me. And now she only wakes up once a night. Should have done it earlier. But anyway, yes, that was my main concern. I didn't really have any concerns for myself personally. I feel like I've had a few operations, I've had cesareans. I just was like, okay, it is what it is. Let's get on with it, get in there and get it done. I think because I'd mentally prepared myself that I wasn't having any more kids anyway. I don't know. I didn't really think about myself much during the process, to be honest, which probably sounds a bit weird, but I was more concerned about my girls and how they were going to be during that time. How did you prepare mentally and practically? Mentally, kind of like what I said before, I didn't really have many concerns. It was more how Isabel would be. I tried to get her used to a bottle. Aubrey, nothing really changed much for her. She still had daycare. She only does 2 days a week. I tried not to talk about it in front of them. I mean, Isabel wouldn't know anyway, but I tried not to talk about it in front of Aubrey because she is that little bit older and she is very clearly that girl. Tried to shield her a little bit from the reality of what was going on. And I think too, to be honest, being a mum, you don't have time. You don't have time for anything. So you didn't have time to like think about what was happening and what was to come and all that. It was kind of just like, all right, it felt like it was 10 weeks away. And then all of a sudden it was like, right, we're going in tomorrow. How long were you in hospital for? So depends where you go and also what country you're in, which I know it probably sounds silly, but I really didn't expect this to vary so significantly. So in some cases, people can actually be discharged the following day, so you only have one night in hospital. However, in my case, I was told at least 2 to 3 nights in hospital. We went privately. I ended up staying 4 nights in hospital just because my gynecologist wanted me to have a little bit more observation and more rest time in the hospital so that I could be cared for properly. With having young kids, like the fatigue, holy dooly, I definitely underestimated how that would feel. How did it actually feel coming out of surgery and what were the first 24 hours like? I remember waking up in the recovery. It was about 2 p.m. The surgery had gone a little bit longer than anticipated. I remember seeing the clock and it said 2 p.m. and then I was in and out of consciousness a lot. 3:30 maybe when I like fully was back to it. So it was about an hour and a half it took me to come out of everything. First 24 hours wasn't too bad. Initially though, oh my God, funny now, not so funny at the time, but when I first got out and I was getting taken back to the ward, so many different things went wrong. I had a bit of a mental breakdown, I'm not going to lie, which is funny now because it's so stupid. But at the time, I was just very overwhelmed and a lot was happening. The fire alarms went off, so they were then evacuating people. They then said, oh, we'll just keep you in here for the time being, and we'll come and get you if this part's going to evacuate. Ended up being fine, thankfully. So anyway, I'm in the room by myself. It's getting dark. There's no lights on. I can't move, mind you. Like I'm literally laying in bed. They had like the little buzzer thing that you can have to call the nurse for help. It had fallen on the floor and I needed help. So I was unable to move. I couldn't do anything. So I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna have to wait for someone to come in. The people who delivered the food came in and they put it on the table next to me, and I said, "Oh, I can't move. Do you mind putting it closer?" And I don't think he spoke much English. And he goes, "Okay," and just walks out. And I was like, and it just, I just lost it. I was like, "No one's here." It was quite funny. Not at the time, but it is now. I think I was just so overwhelmed, and I really needed help. I was in a lot of pain. Where I was also situated in the ward was down the very end. So no one sort of walks past. It was like we were like one of the last rooms. It was entertaining now. Yeah, it was all okay. The first 24 hours weren't too bad, to be honest. I did have an IV drip, which had fentanyl and I think just IV fluids as well, because obviously quite dehydrated. So anytime that I started to feel pain, I could just press the buzzer and it would release like a fentanyl dose. Obviously, you can't overdose and that kind of thing, so it was all safe. Yeah, the first 24 hours was probably the easiest, to be honest. You also have a catheter in, so you don't have to get up and go to the toilet. You don't have to move, anything like that, because I don't want you moving. Really just sort of stuck in bed. I didn't really want to move too much anyway, because even though I was sore, you couldn't really feel it, but you couldn't, I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain. Okay, I'm going to do one more question for this video, and then I'm going to do like another part series later, because I feel like this is going forever. Might not be. Were there any complications during your surgery? Not necessarily. I don't know if you'd call it a complication. There were two things. So one of them related to my cervix. Had a bit of an issue with trying to detach everything because of my previous surgery a few years ago. That made a bit of an impact. It was a bit harder for them to do the surgery. I don't know if I'd call that a complication or not, but they didn't anticipate it to be that bad, and it was the same surgeon. So the other one that came up was the fact that my bladder was actually attached to my uterus. This could be from a few different things. It could be scar tissue from having cesareans. They also did find that I did have a little bit of endometriosis. Not as severe as, like, I've got friends who have got significant, really, really bad endo, and then others that aren't as bad. And I don't know, you don't want to disregard any of it because it's still painful regardless. Didn't have any before my girls, but in between Aubrey and Isabel, I think there was like maybe 6 months that I had a period for, between them, and holy smokes, they were excruciating. Maybe that's why. It would make sense. I don't want to disregard the fact that my case, in terms of other people, it's obviously nowhere near as bad, but it also wasn't just smooth sailing and tickety boo. So there's that. The fact that my bladder was attached to my uterus, they had to really, really carefully, obviously, detach that safely. So the surgery, I think, was meant to take between 2 and 3 hours. I think closer to 3, and in the end was about 4 or 5, I think, from what I can remember them telling me, obviously. Anyway, that's enough for today. I do also have a follow-up appointment in about 4 weeks' time, so I can share probably a little bit more knowledge and things about the surgery, about everything, because obviously at the time I was on a lot of painkillers, and whilst I do recall a lot of information and what happened and things like that, obviously some things are a little bit hazy. And I also will do a second, hopefully just second, not third part of these questions, because I feel like there's a lot more to touch on. And yeah, but if you do have any questions, please, little comment section, and hopefully I will see it and be able to include it. But yeah, please like and subscribe too, which would be awesome. And yeah, see you later.